Hello and welcome to Behind the Scenes, a podcast where we explore the intersection of art, culture, and big ideas. I'm your host, Sean Malone, the creative director for the Foundation for Economic Education and creator of Out of Frame, a video essay series on YouTube. Today, back in studio, we have, or not in studio so much, but everywhere where we are in our podcast recording is Jen Mafasanti, the communications director for the Libertas Institute. And of course, we have Paul Nelson, our senior marketing manager and head of social media at FEE. How are you guys doing today?
Doing well. Tired, which I know you, Sean, relate to.
I do. I'll complain about that momentarily.
Yeah, still recovering from the emotional roller coaster that was the last couple of weeks. So
yeah, Jen and I are doing this is a preview for everybody who's a fan of Out of Frame on YouTube, but not the next episode, or actually probably when this airs, it'll be like right after the current episode drops. But the one we're doing at the end of the month is about Hayao Miyazaki's films, and so I've required Jen to watch a tremendous number of Miyazaki films because we're doing a co-write on that one, and you got to be in a mood for Miyazaki. Yeah. Miyazaki is so wonderful, but wow, all the feels.
Of the feels. We went through probably 6 or 7 Studio Ghibli movies.
That's a lot.
I didn't use all of them in the script.
Were any ones that you hadn't seen before?
There were a few. I had not seen The Wind Rises, for one. That was a bit of a thematic departure for Miyazaki, and it was a beautiful film.
It was like his retirement film.
And then
it kind of feels that way, right?
Yeah.
It feels that way, but it's like him reflecting on this entire body of work, but it's also way less fantastical than all of his other stuff. So I don't know. I'm exceptionally tired because as some of you know, I've been converting a studio, or been converting a detached garage basically in the house that I bought recently into a studio, into a workspace, which is very exciting, but I've done a tremendous amount of the work myself. Plus, I ended up having to frame a room for drywall that's in the house, because there was one room in the entire house that was unfinished, and that room, of course, is going to become my mother-in-law's bedroom, but it needed framing, it needed insulation, which I did last night, which is the worst job that is known to man, and I will never do that again. I will only ever pay somebody to insulate spaces from here on out. That was just the worst. Actually, that's even a lie already, because I'm waiting for the drywaller to do the ceilings, and then I'm going to have to shove insulation in the ceiling. So I am going to have to do this job one more time. But then, for real, never again will I ever try to touch bad insulation. It's the worst thing that I've ever done. And that's on top of framing, moving posts, painting the entirety of the studio, painting all the floors, which we did over the weekend. Oh my goodness, I am beat. And we haven't even moved yet, which happens in 2 weeks. So, well, less than 2 weeks at this point. But Paul, of course, also has been, although really paying people to do manual labor for your house.
Yes. So we, if you hear some chainsaws and some power tools being used, we're having a bunch of yard work done. At some point in our house's history, somebody decided it was a good idea to plant an entire forest in our front yard, and then they left, and then the people that moved in a couple times just didn't take care. So it was unruly, and every time I looked out the window, came home, it just stressed me out. And finally, it was just we got to get this taken care of. So we have deforestation is happening in the front yard. I say deforestation. We still have 8 freaking trees in our front yard. So it's not like it's a big big hindrance. It's just a lot of bushes, bushes. It's spring has sprung here in Atlanta. And
it's starting to look great here. I don't know how Utah's looking, but like we're starting to see
cold
leaves and flowers and stuff all over the place. It's quite nice.
For the second year in a row, it snowed on the first day of spring.
Woo! That's what you
Happy
get.
spring or whatever.
You're living in the high desert, I guess.
Yes, I am.
For some reason.
Yes, I am.
Living.
I do miss trees. I'm gonna
say
high desert. I'm a little envious of the trees you're pulling up. Paul.
Just the words high desert sound like the most cowboy thing that I've ever said. I feel like I don't know why. It just feels
extremely
rugged.
Cowboy, and like I'm trying to embrace it. I have like a very specific set of 2 nail polishes that I use to make like a cactus themed manicure for myself. It's pretty choice.
It's hard to explain to people when you're on an audio only podcast, but Jen does some pretty wild nail like painting creations, and like your Instagram's filled with great versions of that. But I don't really know how that's done. That feels, especially when you're doing your like non-dominant hand, or like where you have to use your non-dominant hand to do your dominant hand. I don't know how you do it. That's wild.
It's practice. It must practice. When I started doing this, it was a hot mess. But
what have you ever done like hydro dipping, where you put paint on the water and then
not. That's not really that sort of thing. That's not really something I'm super into, that kind of design.
Yeah.
If I want to do something super special and detailed, what I usually do is polish stamping. I have stamping plates, and I can use that to transfer a design onto like a little jelly thing, and I just stamp it onto my nail, and it's way better than I could hand paint myself.
Yeah, man. Very creative.
Yeah,
but
very interesting. You'll have to teach me your way, because the other big life news is we're on baby watch 2022. Any day now.
Yeah.
My wife will be having a baby, and we have 2 boys, and this upcoming baby is going to be a girl. So at some point, I'm going to have to learn the ways of the nails.
I'm going to teach you how to paint nails and braid hair.
The hair is what the braiding of the hair is. I've never seen it really done. I know this is sounding really weird. I've never been around hair really. Like I'm an only child. I'm a man, and my wife doesn't do a lot of braiding hair. But I feel
like normal like 3-strand braids, like anybody can do. Like that seems super easy. But when you get into the French braids and the things of that nature, like that just starts to get kind of wild. But I did one of the first really important documentaries that I made was about African hair braiding. And when you get into like twists and like hair braiding for like traditional Senegalese stuff, like that is hard.
That's wild.
And complicated and interesting.
It's super impressive. I can't get my head around it. And I have so much respect for people who do that sort of thing. But Paul, just watch YouTube tutorials. That's honestly,
I was going to say on a sort of related note. On a sort of related note, the woman that documentary is about is a woman named Melanie Armstrong, who lives in Mississippi, and she was the first legally licensed African hair braider in the state of Mississippi, and got laws changed and stuff. It's a very cool story. But she and I are actually talking right now about doing a series of tutorial videos. I may actually have her out to my new studio in the next handful of months, and we might do some hair braiding tutorials. So Paul, maybe you should just swing on by.
Yeah, I have a lot of hair that I need braided right now.
Yeah.
Can I come have my hair braided? That sounds amazing.
You sure could. You absolutely could. She is a actually we probably need I don't know what models, I guess, maybe the right word to describe it. I'm not really sure, like guinea pigs. I don't think it's guinea pigs. She's pretty well practiced at this point, but yeah, I think we need some on-camera hair models for her to work on, or we'll need, like it's interesting because when you're learning hair braiding, and I guess, I mean, every cosmetology program has something like this, but they've got mannequins, like head mannequins with like hair on it, and then you work on the them, and then you get another one, or you get another set of hair or whatever. I don't know, it's interesting, but yeah, probably be doing that. But speaking of little girls, Paul, and having new young women in your life, we want to talk about this new Disney Plus film, well, really Pixar movie, Turning Red, which is, of course, about sort of a coming of age story about a 13-year-old girl named Mei Lin, who lives in Toronto in 2002, which is a fun, integral part of the story. And she's experiencing some life changes. And in this case, as she turns into a giant red panda when she gets excited. So it's a pretty interesting, kind of bizarre story, but basically a coming of age story about a young woman. And we're going to talk about that on today's episode of Behind the Scenes. So yeah, Paul, Jen, what were your sort of initial reactions to seeing Turning Red?
I did not hate this movie. Like, it was not the best movie I've ever seen.
Glowing praise.
This is not
glowing praise.
This is not top tier Pixar, okay? But it wasn't terrible. It was fine.
That is a controversial take that got one guy canceled.
I said what I said, Internet. Come at me.
So a little bit of backstory here. So this is apparently the Disney Plus's record for first weekend viewership, watched by 2.5 million households in the first weekend. But also, it got a critic in trouble, which is pretty bizarre, actually. So I'm going to read this here. The Cinema Blend reviewer gave Turning Red, and I read the review, by the way. It's pretty mild. The reviewer's name, I gotta pull the review up here, but the reviewer's name is Sean O'Connell, and he said, "I recognized the humor in the film, but connected with none of it. By rooting Turning Red very specifically in the Asian community of Toronto, the film legitimately feels like it was made for director Dominique Shi's friends and immediate family members, which is fine, but also a tad limiting in its scope." And in a follow-up tweet, O'Connell said, "Some Pixar films are made for universal audiences. Turning Red is not. The target audience for this one feels very specific and very narrow. If you're in it, this might work very well for you. I'm not in it. This was exhausting." And for that, Sean O'Connell was called a racist and a bigot, anti-Chinese, anti-woman. And Cinema Blend actually pulled the review, apologizing, saying that it was that they had, quote, failed to properly edit the review. Which, if you're saying you failed to properly edit that, then what you're really saying is like, we failed to like vet it for a approved opinion, which is like basically an admission that your reviews are nonsense. Because what's the value of a review if it doesn't reflect somebody's accurate, honest viewpoint of a film? So I don't know. That's pretty nuts. So Jen, with the controversial hot take, the film was okay, but fine, not great, and now you should be canceled permanently. Of course, I felt the same way. Actually, I felt like the film was okay and not great, which we'll get into. But Paul, what were your thoughts?
This film was good. That is.
Okay, John Cena.
Yep. This film good. Yep. This film.
Good.
I would not say call this movie exhausting.
Yeah, obviously that's a little harsh, but
yeah, it feels harsh, but I understand where he's coming from. Obviously, being who I am, this wasn't quote unquote made for me. But also, I never really liked that line of thinking, because
I hate that line of thinking. I don't just like, I actively, vehemently oppose that line of thinking.
Because, and Pixar and Disney have, I mean, this is what they do. They make stories about very specific cultures or ideas and make it applicable to everyone. And I think where this movie goes wrong isn't the Toronto 2002 Chinese community. It's
all that
some of the analogies that we'll talk about that just kind of the analogies feel muddled. But at the end of the movie, there was the analogy that I felt like most applicable hit home with me. And obviously, I mean, I'm not a Chinese Canadian. So
I think I'm so vehemently opposed to this idea that you have to look like or be a part of the same cultural ethnicity as somebody. There's no point to making movies if you are not making them to communicate and to get your audience to empathize with a viewpoint that they are not already familiar with. There's absolutely no point to doing art at all if you are not getting people who don't know what you think to empathize with what you're thinking as a creator. It's absurd. And so when you are looking at that, at films or TV shows or whatever, from the mentality that like I can only identify with somebody who looks and acts and thinks exactly like me, you're wasting your time. You might as well just talk to yourself. What a waste of a medium that is, especially film, because film is so incredibly powerful. But Paul, you're totally right. You can go back through Pixar's history and look, like take Inside Out, for example. Like, I don't care about hockey. I didn't grow up in Minnesota. I don't understand ice sports. I don't like San Francisco. I mean, that actually made me identify with the girl in Inside Out a little bit, because like the idea of her moving to San Francisco seems unbearable to me as well. But like almost everything about her life like was not anything that I experienced growing up. And it wasn't something that like really mattered to me. But the film made me care about her as a character. The film made me care about who she was and what she was going through and all of that kind of stuff. And it was so inventive and everything else that I not only love the movie, but I actually appreciate and value the character. You brought up Luca a minute ago. We all felt that way about Luca. Luca like brought in Italian culture. We talked about the same thing with Encanto, where like I felt like a lot of I don't remember if that was, I feel like it was Colombia. Mm-hmm. Just very, very hyper specific depictions of a cultural environment, right? And a geographic environment. And I empathized with all those characters, and I got into all of those stories because there's something universal in the stories themselves and in the kind of, you know, the longingness for a best friend in Luca, or like live. And it's actually funny because Encanto has a very similar theme in some ways, which is like living up to the expectations of your parents or living up to your family's, you know, like what your family is putting on you, you know, and that gets us back into Turning Red a little bit, because a lot of the story is really about May-Lin like having this very overbearing mom, right? And I want to talk about the mom later a little bit more, because the mom I feel like is too overbearing. Like she's kind of not a good mom in a lot of ways. But one of the things you kind of brought up that really stuck out to me, and it's why I don't love the film, to be honest, is because I think that the red panda thing is being used, like May-Lin turns into a red panda when she gets stressed out. But I think they're using the red panda as a metaphor for too many things at once. And as a result, it gets muddled. So on the one hand, you've got the very obvious metaphor of puberty. There's a scene in the well, there's a lot of scenes in the movie that really reinforce this, right? Like the mom runs with like tampons or pads or whatever to the girl's school, thinking that she's going through puberty. And there's also the scene when her mom first figures out that she's turning into a red panda, which is apparently something that happens to all the women in this family. She puts her in a different room on like a mat, like an old mattress or whatever. There's a lot of these things that are really like pushing that message, except for if you accept that the Red Panda is about that, then a lot of her mom's actions are kind of horrible, because her mom's actions are all about stopping the panda from coming out and preventing it from happening via ritual changes to her body. Like it's kind of gross, actually, when you look at it from that standpoint. The other thing too is her mom didn't warn her about it. She didn't teach her anything about it. She didn't like, it's something that happens to all the women in this family, that they have this sort of curse or blessing or whatever, because a million years ago, well, not a million years ago, you know, like a couple hundred years ago or whatever, one of their family members, God, the more I'm talking about this, the more I'm thinking that this movie is exactly Encanto, but just from a different cultural perspective. Because, you know, a couple hundred years ago, a woman in the family prays to a particular red panda god and gets imbued with special magical powers that enables her to defend her family. Huh. Or have I heard that story in the last 6 months? But anyway, so now all the women in the family turn into red pandas, like giant red pandas, when they're stressed out or when they're, you know, in times of heightened emotion. And if we take it as a puberty metaphor, then all the women in this family like chose to take hormone blockers. I'm not really sure. It's like a really kind of weird way to go. The other way to look at it, or one other way to look at it, is that it's about Mei Lin's inability to tell her mom what she really feels, because her mom is very strict, and Mei Lin wants to go hang out and play with her friends and go to boy band concerts, and she's struggling to tell her mom. So maybe the red panda represents that. There's problems with that metaphor too, but or like using the red panda as that metaphor as well. But I don't know. It just feels a little mixed to me as a result. But in the end, we come back to the relationship between the mom and the daughter. And I think, Paul, your point was that like she's like that's really like the best stuff. And I think that's probably true.
The analogy that connects with me the most, and it took half the film to get to this analogy, because the first act was mostly about the puberty angle, which it felt weird to all the reasons that Sean was saying. But towards the end of the movie, the reason the red panda was basically Mei Lin dealing with parental expectations, and also her mother dealing with her mom's parental expectations. And that is something that almost everyone has to deal with, and they handle it beautifully. And there's the really touching moment, like all Pixar movies have, where they get you at the end, where you feel like you're about to bawl your eyes out. And that is a really good analogy. And then the other one that I've been thinking of, that it feels they kind of touch on this, is that the red panda, when they moved to Canada, their red panda powers became an inconvenience. And it really feels like it was a good analogy for immigrants, and especially Chinese immigrants having to hide their culture, or not necessarily hide it, but put less emphasis on their culture when they moved to Canada, the United States,
or turn it into an attraction, which it kind of is, right? They run like a red panda temple.
So those two analogies work perfectly, and I wish it was the whole movie was about that. But the first half of the movie was just such a mess that it really, really hampered the rest of the film.
Yeah, I agree with both of you that the red panda metaphor was pulled in too many directions for it to be entirely clear as to what it actually represented. I do think that this film says a lot more about toxic parenting and toxic familial relations than it does about going through puberty. And that message absolutely hits. It's super important. And, you know, as a parent, it resonates. And, you know, I watched this movie with my kids and they seem to really enjoy it too. So There you go. I will say that turning into a giant red panda during moments of heightened emotional stress, and this, coming on at age 12, 13, 14, something like that, if that had been happening to me, I would have only been a giant red panda when I was in 8th grade. Like, being a 13-year-old girl is a hot mess just anyway. Like, that is just the worst version of yourself. Everything is terrible. I was terrible at 13. I would not want to associate with 13-year-old Jen. So yeah, I would have preferred being a giant red panda. So
I think this is an interesting aspect of the character, though, because, and this is another thing that I feel like is a little muddled with the film, because like that would make sense to me if the red panda was like, if it was a metaphor for the sort of embarrassment that people feel at 13 or 14 or whatever, when they're going through all that kind of stuff. And it's not just puberty, right? I mean, like, puberty is sort of the impetus for a lot of these things, but it's also that, like, you're changing your friend groups, like your social status is often in question. You're going from like 7th and 8th grade into high school, or you're starting to get into that point where you're like, the way that you're perceived by your peers is changing. You're going from becoming, from being a child to like becoming your own person. But I think that one of the interesting things about the movie, though, is that Mei Lin seems to kind of have it all figured out at the beginning. Like, she spends a lot of the first, like literally the first few minutes of the film, like just dumping exposition on the audience about how much she loves who she is and how confident she is as a 13-year-old. Like, I was not that confident as a 13-year-old for sure, but she's like, this is my group of super awesome friends. This is what I like to do. I'm dominating math class and I'm a nerd. And if you don't like that, deal with it, kind of stuff. And like, she's super confident, and she's like, and she dances, and she's like very excited about being this. There's a boy band in the movie called Four Town. And it's like, just also, we got to talk about that in a bit, like just dead on 2002 boy band. Like, just that part, like Pixar just nailed completely. But all that stuff, like, it kind of undercuts the metaphor, though, because, and it's just in the same way that like the puberty metaphor is sort of undercut by the mom, like not treating that the way that like a good mom would treat it. This is undercut, like the metaphor of the red panda being sort of sublimated, like individuality, is undercut by the fact that she's already like really confident in herself. And so it would have made a lot of sense if the panda was like, if Mei Lin was constantly struggling under the weight of her mom's expectations and not willing to show her true self in public or to her friends or whatever, which the movie hints at, right? Like, the movie hints at this with the fact that the way that the red panda emerged in the first place is that her mom found her notebook, which, by the way, that I did find relatable. Like, that was one of the few scenes in the movie where she's just like looking down at the notebook. Like, she left the notebook like just a little bit out from under her bed, and she's like, don't look down, don't look down, don't look down. She looks down. Of course, her mom finds the notebook where she's drawn a bunch of pictures of her kissing this boy that is, who has no idea she exists. He's just like a guy who works at a convenience store down the street or whatever. And then the mom, it royally embarrasses her by showing all of the images to this boy, who has no idea what's going on. And then, of course, her classmates find the images and make fun of her. But the problem is, if that was the metaphor, if the panda was like her embarrassment, then all the stuff that happens afterwards doesn't make any sense, because when she actually reveals that she's a red panda to her friends love it and they think it's great. When she reveals, or when she accidentally, when some of her classmates who like make fun of her, some of her antagonistic classmates discover that she is has this, weird red panda side to her, they think it's cool too. And they don't make fun of her, and it's not embarrassing. It becomes a source of joy for her classmates. She gets invited to parties. She uses it to make money to go to a concert because everybody wants to take a photo. It's weird. Like, all that stuff just doesn't quite work to me. And like, metaphorically, it's so mixed that I just don't understand. Like, it just feels misused, I guess, in the end. Which is weird for a Pixar movie, because they go through so much development. It just feels like this is something that was kind of half baked, or it was baked in like 3 different directions and then all mashed together at the end.
Yeah, this felt like the central idea was to talk about parental expectations and maybe some of the immigration story stuff, which would fit for the culture they were depicting. But then somebody gave a note about, hey, this girl's 13. Maybe we should have some jokes about, it's a red panda. So obviously that means this. I don't know. It felt tacked on, and
I feel like they made the note, we just did this with Encanto, and now you got to do something else.
Yep. There were several things about this movie that felt like they were studio notes, like executive notes from the studio. Be like, nope, we gotta bring in this, and we have to talk about that, and it's got to mean this sort of thing, and you got to make it work. So do that. And we've seen this over and over again with movies these days, where you can very distinctly feel the hand of the studio in the finished product of the film, and it doesn't work. It doesn't feel right. It mixes metaphors like it does here, and the voice of the filmmaker is lost, or the themes get watered down to the point of just, why even bother having these things in there? And it's a shame. It really is a shame, because I think if that hadn't happened, this could have been a really beautiful movie.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, look, a lot of the movie, as far as that specificity is concerned, in a good way. So this is a butchering paraphrase of a David Mamet quote, but he said, in the specific contains the universal. I think I'm probably misquoting him exactly in terms of the exact phrasing, but it's a really smart observation to me, which is that, and I think Luca, going back to Luca, I think is a very, very good example of this, which, like, Luca is such a specific character and a specific time and place and culture and everything else. And because it is so specific, I really deeply understand very quickly, like in that movie, I understand exactly who these people are, where they're coming from. And because I understand that, I can empathize, I can care about them, and then I can see myself in the areas where I connect, right? And Luca, I think that this movie has a lot of it. Yeah, go on.
And in Luca, I just want to point out, like, you can have story points and certain elements that are extremely targeted to a very specific audience. There were Italian puns in there that went over my head, but had my husband howling because they were so funny, and it did not detract from my understanding, appreciation, and enjoyment of that film.
No, I think this is just like another layer on the idea that Pixar has always had, especially where they've made films that work on a bunch of different levels. And like in the beginning, I feel like a lot of those levels they're very American centric, but they're like parents and children and sort of different levels in between, where the kids get one aspect of the joke, but parents get a totally different aspect of the joke. And you can do that without losing anything. In fact, let me rephrase, you can do that. If you do that right, you gain a lot, because you're gaining layers of complexity to the story, which is great. And Luca did that pretty well. But I didn't have to get the Italian references, which I couldn't, right? Like, I have no context for that. I couldn't get that, but I could absolutely get the relationship between the boy and his friend, the boy and his parents. Like, you get all of that stuff, and that all makes sense. This movie had a lot of those elements, I think. And this is why I don't think it's a bad movie. I mean, I certainly think that in general it was fairly good. You know, again, the 2002 aspect was extremely specific. It was a very Canadian movie, particularly a very Toronto movie. There's a lot of things in there that are that level of detailed and specific. And we were talking about this a little bit like yesterday, but one of the things that was really neat to me is looking in the credits, seeing that it was actually Billie Eilish and Phineas who did the music for all of the boy band pop stuff, and they just absolutely nailed it. Like the pop music feels, it's the melodies and the harmonies and everything about it is just like dead on, except for it uses some of the kind of instruments that Phineas likes to use in modern stuff. So it's got this like little tiny modern touch to it, but like it just feels perfectly like you're watching an NSYNC concert from 2001, 2002. All that stuff really works, and if you're playing on parental nostalgia, that all works. But I think, like, even going back to that review, going back to the Cinema Blend review, I don't think what Sean what was his name, O'Connell. I don't think what he was reacting to was necessarily like the specificity of the Chinese culture or the Canadian culture or any of that. I think it was the fact that the metaphor and the storytelling itself was just a little bit muddy. And as a result, I think you couldn't quite get there because it wasn't quite clear what they're trying to go to in the first place. I don't quite know what theme this movie has. What like unified central theme the movie wants to go down. Of course, Paul, going back to your point, the third act basically involves Mei Lin going through this ceremony to remove her connection to the Red Panda spirit, which brings in all of her aunts and her grandmother and a shaman played by James Hong, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
And they go through and try to remove her connection to the panda spirit. And she, of course, because it's, of course, right? Absolutely. This is going to happen. She rejects that. She runs away so that she can go to this boy band concert that her friends, have been wanting her to attend. And then her mom shows up. Her mom, apparently you're able to get your connection to the panda spirit back because her mom eventually shows up, major spoiler, right? As the biggest red panda you've ever seen, a stadium-sized red panda. And then it becomes about the mom and the daughter, right? Like really then it solidifies as something that's really about parental expectations. But like Paul, you said earlier, like it kind of took like half the movie to even get there. And then it took the other half of the movie to like make the point, Mm-hmm. So I don't know. She wasn't a great mom, though. I'm gonna be honest. I think if anything, we should be taking this movie as a lesson on how not to be a mom.
So it seems like our broader culture, everyone that's making movies nowadays, have had pretty overbearing parents, and
it feels like that might be true.
It does feel that way, doesn't it?
Because every kids movie has overbearing parents, and I'm wondering because if you look back. Kids movies from the 80s, there's no parents.
Yeah, no, parents are complete absentees almost all the time.
They're nowhere to be found.
From a storytelling standpoint, I get it. It's a lot easier for like someone who doesn't have any sort of responsible adult figure in their life to just run off and have adventures. Because otherwise your mom's like, maybe don't. Because it's dangerous out there. At least pack a snack. It's an obstacle to the call to adventure. So I get it. But
to some extent, I had that growing up. I mean, my parents were far from absentee, but like especially my really early childhood, like 5-6 years old, like when I was still living in Washington before we moved back to Nebraska, like I would stay out hanging out, riding bikes with the neighborhood kids literally all day. And
same.
the rule was check in by phone or check in person every couple hours or whatever it was, and then make sure you're home by 6. But like during the summers, yeah, we just did whatever we wanted. Like there was woods back behind that, like at the end of the street, there was like a cul-de-sac that just ended in some woods, and we would hang out in there. We'd ride bikes, around the block. I mean, we sharpened sticks and threw spears at each other when I was a kid. Like we didn't have, Yeah,
it's kind of sad that the main antagonists in our society and the stories that we tell each other are our parents. It's kind of depressing, honestly.
Well, that's also a big controversial thing about the show. There's been some parents groups and like religious groups and stuff that are upset about that, and I think there's also some people who are upset about the menstruation stuff. But like,
they're annoyed that it teaches young kids to be disobedient or something like that. I'm like, I think perhaps, that's some folks, you are entirely missing the point of parenting.
Yes, yeah, I would in this case, I would say like if your mom is as overbearing as this mom is, being disobedient is probably the lesson. It's probably an okay lesson comparatively.
Like, do we want to raise children to be obedient adults, or do we want to raise them to be competent adults? There's a huge difference there. And like, if your goal is the former, then the problem is you, not your kids.
Yeah.
No, I mean this all reminds me of Lenore Skenazy. So Lenore Skenazy is a writer. Wrote a book called, I think the book is just called Free Range Parenting, but she's sort of the architect of the
branded the worst mom in America.
And you're right. She was branded the worst mom in America for what, you ask? And that is for allowing her 11-year-old son to ride the subway alone in New York City. And he did this. She did it because he asked her to. He thought that it was an important rite of passage for him to be able to do by himself. And he felt like he was ready at 11. And she gave him, like a phone and a backpack full of snacks and whatever else, and sent him on his way. And he went to the library. I think he went to the New York Public Library and got some books, and he came home and he was fine. And for that, she became a subject of discussion on news, on like local news, on The View. Her son, this is the worst part. She became a villain of the week on like NCIS or something like that, where they actually showed a body of an 11-year-old child that was made to look like her son in the show that they made. Like the writers of like I don't remember if it was NCIS or which show it was. I'd have to look it up.
I think it was Law and Order.
But like it was a police. Yeah, it might have been Law and Order. It was a police procedural that had a plot of the week was mom lets her son ride the subway, and of course, because the world is filled with evil people, he got kidnapped and murdered. And here, mom, how do you like looking at your son on a slab because because you allowed him this little bit of freedom at 11? That was just shocking to me, like to see her get dragged to that degree. But it's all because I don't understand. Like, we have this really weird culture because on the one hand, we're like really sensitive to overbearing parents. On the other hand, like we seem to be terrified of allowing parents to do anything else, because you can't let your kids play in the street like we did when we were growing up, or be their own people. I don't know, it's very weird. Like this sort of tiger mom, like helicopter parent thing is reinforced by a lot of stuff, and yet here it is, Paul. I think to your point, I think we're seeing the artistic consequences of some of that. I think as people get into their 20s and 30s, having been raised by like super overbearing parents from the 90s and early 2000s, like it's starting to become a thing. I think it's starting to become a trope in cinema.
Yep.
And
it doesn't seem to be getting any better either. I mean, we have young children. We see it quite a bit. And it's not like we're putting our children into dangerous situations or anything like that. But it's this idea that, and this movie does get to this, is that that children can't be their own person, and that they have to be perfect. They have to be
a
grown-up already that can make life-altering decisions, or can't make life-altering decisions. And that timeline keeps getting pushed back, not just by parents, but by our government. It annoys me to no end that you can join the military, but you can't have a cigarette or a drink, or
it's bizarre, right? You can take out hundreds of thousands of dollars in student loans and go to war, but you are not allowed to make your own choices with respect to alcohol or cigarettes or a ton of other stuff. Shockingly, driving even at this point is limited until people are 17 or in some cases 18. It's bizarre to me. Like
it really.
Like we can't.
And I don't know what the solution is. I don't know what the solution is. Obviously, it's because unfortunately there's pressure on parents from Karens basically. That feel that it's on them to keep the children safe, and this is the safest area, and at least in the United States, the safest area for children ever. So
of course,
I think you see a lot of this stuff with the COVID precautions, and everything like that. Like I remember when maybe a year ago, I was talking about COVID with my wife, who is not necessarily one to be taken up with hysteria, but she was wildly overcalculated the deaths of kids, and not even just small kids, anybody under the age of 18. And when you tell people that what the numbers actually are, it's they don't believe you, because you don't hear everything you hear is death and destruction, children being kidnapped, sex trafficking. It's everywhere you look, there's a boogeyman around the corner, when in reality it's not really the truth in most American neighborhoods.
No, it's I mean, honestly, I think the answer, to the extent that there is an answer, is just as a parent or as just a person living in this society to just start being more unapologetic about your choices in that regard. Like if I think the only real solution to me to this sort of Karen mindset that we've kind of seen is like, if somebody comes and says, hey, your kid, can't run that lemonade stand on the sidewalk here, you say, he is, too bad, get out of here. This is this is not your decision. Your kid should he can't be riding a bicycle, without you being right behind him the whole way. Well, he's gonna. So, too bad.
Unfortunately, most people don't actually come up and talk to you. They just call the police.
Oh yeah, for sure. They'll call cops.
I will say I do appreciate the sort of more hands-off parenting culture here in Utah, and it's actually enshrined in law. We do have free-range parenting is legally protected. Minor entrepreneurship is legally protected. Like, kids can own and run businesses without business licenses or paying sales tax or anything like that. Stuff, and that is something that, Libertas has worked very, very hard in order to get done here in Utah. And so even if Karens are like, oh my goodness, there are children having fun on the sidewalk, and they call the police, there's nothing the police can do. It's fully legal.
Yeah. And that's a good point, though. That's actually, I think, a really good point. And it is something that you can be proactive about, which is to protect kids legally in a way where you either reduce the laws on the books, or you create, laws that enshrine certain things, like kids will never be charged a business, never be required to have business license or something like that. But in general, I think part of the problem, of course, is that we're so over legislated, and that we've got so many crimes and so many ways of police, engaging with people in the first place. Police also really need to say, hey, that, I hear you. There's some kid, running a lemonade stand on the boardwalk over there, but guess what? Can't do anything about it. So I'm not going to send anybody. And if that happens, and the more that happens, the less Karens have any incentive to call, right? The less you got any incentive for somebody to be like, look, this guy is, he's barbecuing in the park, and like, he's got a dog here or whatever. And like all that kind of stuff. You just go, okay, well, I can't do anything about it legally. So too bad.
Yeah. And because it is legally protected, it's becoming more and more culturally normalized.
Yeah.
So there's even less inclination to even try to do anything about it. Just sort of, make sure nobody's like bleeding. But other than that, it's great. It's fine. Go for it. Go nuts.
But I think to Paul's point a minute ago, I think COVID, probably shouldn't even talk about this, but like, it's part of the problem with all of this stuff is that it empowers those very Karens it really reinvigorates that whole idea, right? Like, it reinvigorates it to the point where you can say, oh, that person's not wearing a mask, or, oh my gosh, they went into this public space and came within 6 feet of some other human being. Like, we got to get the authorities involved. We got to stop this from happening. But now they have some semblance of authority behind it. There's some mandate or some kind of power structure that they can exploit to, be weird antisocial germaphobes, basically. Yeah.
But it's all this stuff, and I'm not even just talking about, the big vid. All of these things are, think of the children. It's like that Simpsons episode. Think of the children, somebody. And it's always couched in this it's for the children, when in reality we see these kind of movies, Luca, Encanto, movie after movie after movie. It's the parents are the bad guys, and it's just like something is seriously wrong with our culture if we can't even think of a villain besides our parents. There's something seriously broken, and I think parents innately realize it, but they're scared out of their minds by our culture, by our government, over regulations like we've all talked about. And it drives me up a wall, because it's every kid is being, even if maybe not, this is maybe an over exaggeration, but every kid is being affected by this and being held back to some certain extent. Obviously some more than others, but it touches everyone. And that's why these movies are so connecting with so many people.
Yeah. And if kids are so resilient, why do so many adults need therapy?
This is kind of where I was going to end with this. It's just that it all seems to be serving somebody's neurosis more than it is. It's not the kids, right? Mm-hmm. Like, it's parents being super neurotic, and people who aren't even parents being super neurotic, politicians and people really have no connection to your kids being super neurotic. It's very, very weird. But let's wrap this here. So I think Turning Red, I don't know, for me it's kind of a flawed movie, but it's got some nice moments. The boy band stuff is great. I think a lot of the interaction between Maylin and her friends is pretty cute, but for the most part, for me, we're gonna do our star rating. I'll probably give this half a star. I think that's about. I didn't hate it, didn't love it. It's fine. Kind of not really anywhere in my top tier of Pixar, I guess I would say. Paul, what would your rating be?
Yeah, I would agree. Half a star. It was half a good movie.
Jen, I also agree with half a star. Solid C+.
Well, we should all look forward to getting canceled for our horribly unacceptable.
It's nice knowing you guys.
I'm going to end this on. So I had pulled the discussion of the Cinema Blend critic from an article in National Review by Kyle Smith. Said the racist critic forced to cower for innocuous review is the title of the article. But I want to conclude with Kyle Smith's final lines of his article about this canceled review, because I think they're really worth thinking about as far as movies, and it sort of ties all this together. It says, to the extent that a movie takes us inside a culture or subculture with which we might be unfamiliar, that's a good thing. Film does a better job than any other art form, except maybe the novel, of liberating us from the restrictions of our own experience and catapulting us into a world we might otherwise never come to know or understand. We should be eager to profit from broadening of soul and imagination. If your impulse is to think, I don't know these people, think again. Film, even sometimes a Disney cartoon, can be a great way to get to know your neighbors on this planet. Be grateful for the opportunity. Well said, Kyle Smith. Nicely done, sir. All right. Thank you, everybody, for listening to Behind the Scenes. If you are a Patreon or Subscribestar supporter of the show, we're going to do something a little bit different. We're going to start just doing straight out bonus episodes. They're going to be totally detached from the regular episode. But to that extent, if you are not a subscriber or a Patreon or a supporter on Patreon or Subscribestar.com, check us out there. It's patreon.com/outoframeshow or subscribestar.com/outoframeshow. Really any donation and you'll get access to bonus episodes, bonus content, private channel on Discord, a bunch of other stuff. But for those who are not subscribed, thank you so much for listening. And thanks for being fans of ours on YouTube and TikTok, Instagram, everything else. And we will see you next time.